Over the last few years, we've seen Lane Kiffin take this Rebels defense to a level that we hadn't seen in years past. How are they going to elevate Ole Miss even more? Womack's 40-yard dash, 4.67. This
came about Ole Miss being right up there in the thick of it for an SEC championship run and for a playoff run. These two guys have got to be coached up. They've got to be developed.
Transfer Takeover Part 2. Today we will be going through the top 25 rankings of 19 to 15 in that order. Starting off with number 19. I'm Nathan Johnston here with my co-host Brad Hopkins. It's time to break the huddle. Let's start off with our 19th position, and that's the Ole Miss Rebels as they pick up 2 star defensive ends that are going to be making a major impact this 2025 season. That being Princewill Umanmielen. I think I pronounced that right. I apologize if I didn't. And Da'Shawn Womack. 2 major key pickups for the Rebels. Over the last few years, we've seen Lane Kiffin take this Rebels defense to a level that we hadn't seen in years past. Brad, what are these 2 guys going to elevate the Ole Miss Rebels even more? How are they going to elevate Ole Miss even more this year and maybe get a playoff run going?
Right. So, yeah, you mentioned one thing. Kiffin, really the past 2 cycles, recruiting and especially transfer portal, he's focused on defensive players. I mean, I know that he came out himself and said in the 23 season, when Ole Miss was a highly ranked team and they went and just got tore up by Georgia and really got beat up by some of the SEC, it made him reevaluate that he needs to really, really focus on the front 4, but the front 7 on the defensive side of the football. We saw that last year with some of their transfer grabs, and they went out and did it this year. And Nate, I think the big thing that stands out to me about these 2 guys with Princewill, I'm not going to try to say his last name, and Da'Shawn Womack is these 2 guys, from a physicality standpoint, they look the part. Princewill, goes about 6'5" in the 240s, and the Da'Shawn Womack 6'5", 260. So 2 big physical edge rushers, but the production hasn't necessarily been there. They are going to have to come into Oxford and up their production. I mean, we're looking at Princewill, who has a sack and a half in his 2 years at Nebraska, and then Da'Shawn Womack 2.5 sacks in his time at LSU, and specifically with Womack, this is a guy that was a top 40 recruit, a 5-star by some services. So they have not lived up to the ranking yet, and so Ole Miss is going to have to harvest that potential and hopefully recreate the productivity that we saw out of the Ole Miss front 7 last year. No, they didn't make a playoff run like you mentioned a few minutes ago, like they're hoping to this year, but Ole Miss was on the verge of making that playoff run last year. So I like the additions, but these 2 guys have got to be coached up. They've got to be developed because they have not quite lived up to expectations, in my opinion.
And I think that's the big key takeaway as well for me when I look at these 2 guys. It's the developmental aspect. A lot of these transfer guys that we've seen even last week's episode, a lot of them have more developing to do than some of the guys that are already intact starters in the SEC, I would say specifically, and other conferences, but more specifically the SEC because we're talking about Ole Miss.
Right.
These are 2 guys that have, in my opinion, a chance to really make their mark this year and increase their draft stock to 3rd, 2nd, maybe even a 1st-round draft. Listen, one guy's coming from LSU. He knows what it takes. Another guy's coming from Nebraska. I'd be willing to say he knows what it takes, too, playing in the Big Ten.
Yeah. If they unlock the talent and the potential they have, I mean, you're talking about Ole Miss being right up there in the thick of it for an SEC championship run and for a playoff run.
Absolutely. And when I look at a guy like Princewill, he reminds me, and I know I'm big on the NFL comparisons, reminds me of another defensive end, former Michigan standout, Josh Uche from the New England Patriots. Kind of an undersized guy for a traditional defensive end, but compensates with exceptional burst, flexibility, and pass rushing acumen. This guy can get to the quarterback as well as Princewill. He's going to be a guy that I think is going to make a major jump this year for the Ole Miss Rebels. There's a big game coming up this year that I think about specifically, and that's on the road at Georgia. Last year, Ole Miss got Georgia on the ropes at home. Now they got to go on the road. Defense travels.
Yeah.
These are two big guys that I think are going to make an impact in hopes of beating Georgia along with the rest of their competition.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head. That I think the kind of the final point I want to make about these two guys and thinking about that Ole Miss defensive front is Walter Nolan, who was a very, very high draft pick. He was a very, very high school recruit and transfer recruit. He did a lot in the interior for that Ole Miss Rebel defense and that Ole Miss front four. I think about does Ole Miss have that to where now you have these guys and you have to play them one-on-one? We're going to see. Like I said, I think I love that Lane Kiffin has really, I don't know that he really goes after high school guys on the defensive side aggressively, but he definitely tries to make an effort in the transfer portal. And you can see it work last year. Ole Miss was very, very much improved defensively. You mentioned the upset of Georgia. They still, to me, lost some games they should have won. Kentucky and Florida come to mind, but look, Ole Miss is going to be dangerous, and we know they're going to score points, and they just have to put it together on defense. And these two guys are a good start, but once again, that potential has got to be unlocked.
Yeah, they've got to find diamonds in the rough, and that's weird to say with an SEC team.
Right.
But when you're competing against the Georgias, the Bamas, Ole Miss is kind of that. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for this. They're a second-tier SEC team, in my opinion. They're not as good as Georgia and Bama, but they are good enough to get elite recruits in the portal. This is going to be an interesting year for Ole Miss moving forward. Lane Kiffin has shown promise. Now he's got to deliver this year. Now it's got to be the SEC. Now it's got to be playoff contention. And I think these are two guys that can help him get there. And I just want to mention real quick with Womack, Montez Sweat is my NFL comparison for the Chicago Bears. Big physical guys both standing at 6'5", athleticism ideal for pass rushers. Womack's 40-yard dash, 4.67. This kid can move.
Yeah.
And when you're having to chase down quarterbacks in the SEC, this is the guy on the edge that you want.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's he's the one to me that if he lives up to that 5-star billing and that top 40 recruit, this Ole Miss defense is going to be tough to deal with, and they have got a legit chance to win the SEC and like we said, make that playoff run.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you're an Ole Miss fan, let us know down in the comments what you think about these two new edge rushers coming to Oxford, Mississippi. Can they be the difference maker this year for the Ole Miss Rebels and helping y'all get to that next jump into playoff contention? Be sure to subscribe down below, give this video a like, turn on that bell notification so you can stay up to date when we post our latest content. We'll see you next time. It's time to break the huddle.